Hi guys, welcome to session 4. In this week's session, we're going to be talking about explicit instruction, also known as direct instruction, and reading fluency and what that looks like in the secondary classroom. Let's begin with explicit instruction. And as I've shared with you before, I'm in a lot of classrooms all over the country. And explicit instruction is something that I feel like we have really lost the art of, especially after COVID. And I don't know what your experience has been, but it definitely seems like we've shifted gear much more to trying to focus on engagement. And in doing so, we've left behind direct instruction, meaning our explanation. Explicit just meaning very specifically and detailed explaining things. And that's what we've lost the art of. Most of the time when I see vocabulary instruction, it is here's a worksheet, go find the definition, use it in a sentence. That's not instruction. Or I'll see here's a quick video, and then let's jump into a game to practice it. One of the things that I want you to look for while you're in your classroom doing your observations and your practicum time is to look for what types of explicit instruction you're seeing, how much of it you're seeing during one class period. Let's look at really what that looks like so that you know what you're looking for. Explicit instruction is very planned and detailed. We call it structured and systematic. So scaffolding, if you've heard the term scaffolding, and you can think about that as, scaffolding around a building that is being erected or painted, where it helps someone elevate them to be able to do a skill. So it's not watering down the content to make it easy or inaccessible for someone. It's giving them a tool or a boost they need in order to be able to reach up and attain whatever that thing is if it's out of their grasp. So we do that in a way that's called I do, we do, you do. And that's kind of the process for it. So I do it, I'm modeling. We do it together. That's the guided practice. And then you do it independently. And that's not just once. It doesn't mean I can only do it once. I can do it multiple times. We can do it together multiple times. And then you can do it independently multiple times with me overseeing that to give you feedback. And that's what instruction should look like. So the first step of the process is setting clear and specific goals. And we can do that as learning objectives. We know that learning objectives are important. They can lose their meaning because we think it's just something that we're doing out of compliance. But it's important for students to know whenever you begin teaching a lesson, tell them what you're learning and tell them why you're learning it. You might have it written down on the board out of compliance for maybe a building protocol or requirement or expectation, from your principal or your administrator. However, this is good teaching. What we're doing, what we're talking about, and why we're learning, especially when we get into adult model theory. It is based on relevance, but so is it for adolescents. Adolescents want to know the relevance in order to help them buy in, they need to know the relevance of what you're teaching. And we need to create a step-by-step modeling. So think alouds and demonstrations. Think alouds, if you haven't heard this term before, is modeling the metacognition. So metacognition, thinking about what I'm thinking. I don't know what that looks like in your head. So we have to think out loud to model it. So if I'm looking at a math equation, if I am doing some reading of a difficult text, I'll pause and I will say out loud what I'm thinking so that the students can see my thinking process. So it's a demonstration of your thinking. We want to make sure that we're building careful sequencing. That's difficult in secondary ELA because oftentimes you won't have a prescripted curriculum. You'll be creating your own curriculum. So it's important to have lots of spiral review, bringing in things that are the most important things so that they can master those. It's called retrieval, space practice. Studies show that having spaced retrieval and space practice is better for long-term retention than cramming or mass practice, just learning something once and walking away. So that sequencing is building on simple skills in order to move to complex skills. For example, we want to look at, can a student write a really good introductory sentence? Do they know how to do that? Then we build on the first paragraph. What does an introductory paragraph look like in a writing? Then we move on to the body. Then we move on to the conclusion. So we carefully chunk the steps out and build in that logical way. We don't just throw it all at once, and we don't start with a conclusion. So we do it in this systematic, detailed way that makes sense. And we have lots of frequent checks for understanding. And the best way to do this is not to ask one student for their thoughts or ideas, because that one student, we don't know what's happening with all of the other student voices and what's happening in their mind. So we want choral responses. We want something on a whiteboard where they're all participating, or we want lots of turn and talks and sharing. So if I pose a question before I just turn around and ask somebody to raise their hand, I'm going to give them 10 or 15 seconds. I'm going to say, think, let's get some think time. I'm going to give you a second just to think about your answer before I respond. And I'll shut up and I'll wait 20 seconds. This is your think time. Then I'll say, okay, turn and talk to a partner. Tell them what you thought about, tell them your idea, tell them your rationale, whatever it might be. So then they turn to their partner. Everybody is participating. That's what we want. We want 100% participation from everything we ask. If we're reading, we don't want one person reading out loud. We want everybody reading. We chorally read as a class for a little bit. And then we partner read. So everybody is getting a chance to participate. The person that has the moving mouth, the person that's doing the talking, is typically the person who's learning. Then we want that guided practice. This is when we shift in. That was all I do stuff, me leading that. Now it's getting into the we do. We're going to practice with teacher support. Maybe I'm posing questions, they're writing answers on the whiteboard, or this is where they're writing that introductory sentence and then sharing that with a partner, or I'm coming around and giving specific feedback. This is where it's great to do centers, almost like stations that you see in an elementary classroom. Centers and stations are completely appropriate for secondary students. We want to make sure that it's not fluff, games, activities. We want to make sure that these are deeper learning activities, but it's a great way to structure a classroom because it's engaging. And because I can also pull small groups and look at individual writing pieces with students, and then have that collaboration while other students are maybe reading in pairs, or they're doing editing, they're doing revising, they're completing graphic organizers, or doing some other deep reading strategies. And I mentioned before we want active student engagement. So we want that 100% participation. So whether it's hand signals, choral responses, turn and talks, we want all of those things happening. And then a continuous review. If this is really important, we're going to come back to it. We're going to review it maybe every other week, or we're doing a lot of writing throughout the year, throughout the semester. We're practicing these skills over and over again. I am attaching a video about direct instruction by Anita Archer. She also has an excellent text that I would recommend. Really breaks down each component of instruction. This is a 4 or 5 minute video. It's a quick watch. So please, once you've finished this video, go ahead and move over to Anita Archer's video. I want to continually bring this statistic back to our mind so it's at the forefront. So 70% of 8th graders are not reading on grade level in our country. 70% of 12th graders, seniors, are not reading on grade level in our country. So keep this in mind, and that percentage is even higher for our minority or subpopulations. Again, this is review. What is the science of reading? It's a collection of research that identifies the best practices in learning to read. So we've taken the research over the past 50 years and really combined it to make this meta-analysis, a study of studies that shows us what is best for the brain, how do we learn to read, and how do we retain what we're reading. And we use all that information to really align our instruction to best practices, and that's what the science of reading is. That cornerstone model that I shared with you, Scarborough's reading rope, it breaks those strands of reading down. Here's everything that has to happen simultaneously in your brain in order to have reading comprehension. The simple view of reading tells us that we have to have both decoding skills and background knowledge, language comprehension, vocabulary, all of those things in order to have reading comprehension. One strength in an area cannot overcompensate for a deficit in the other. And when we have an assessment, we have to be able to decouple those two components, decoding and word recognition, from language comprehension, so that we can really see where the deficits are in our students so we know how to support them. So we need a test that breaks down all those components on the left so we can see what they're struggling with. Any intervention. Intervention is kind of like a pull-out time that we can provide extra practice with students. Anytime we have extra practice with students, tutoring, study halls where students are supposed to be working on makeup stuff, it's really helpful to have this kind of information in your back pocket to know where they're struggling so that you can support them. Let's pull out that bottom thread of word recognition. And we have those strands: phonological awareness, which is letter to sound correspondence; decoding, which is breaking words apart so that I can sound them out. And we're going to look today at sight recognition. So this is talking about automaticity, words that you have memorized by sight. And this is part of your fluency. Fluency is highly correlated to the size of an individual's sight word bank. So I want you to think about this for a moment. Your own lexicon, your internal vocabulary bank, is individual for each human. This is based on, we get automaticity from being exposed to words over and over again. Think about it. When's the last time you've really had to stop and sound out a word? Most words that you see on a daily basis, you recognize automatically. Maybe you didn't learn them that way, but at this point in your life as a frequent reader, when you see common text, you don't have to sound it out. You automatically know it. And that's the goal. We want all reading to eventually become this automated response. We see a text and we say it, we know it, we understand it. Only if you're doing some type of content area, you go into a new field, you switch a career or a hobby, are you picking up new vocabulary. Vocabulary for adults is, so if we look at vocabulary learning from an infant, child, adolescent, high schooler, adult, it begins to just plateau, flatline. In your mid-30s, your vocabulary growth just basically flatlines. And this is because you have your field where you work, and you have your hobbies kind of set. Unless you take up a new hobby, knitting, golf, aviation, all of these have their own individual vocabularies. Pick up an instrument, that has its own vocabulary. So unless you change a career field, pick up a hobby, you're typically not going to grow your vocabulary or introduce yourself into new words. So each individual has this unique sight word bank based on your experiences, your hobbies, your field, and the words that you're exposed to the most. Louisa Moats, who is one of our kind of founding researchers, or our current researchers in the science of reading, and she's developed a lot of great activities and programs and curriculum that are helping students read all over the country. This is something she says: processing language, especially at the level of sounds, syllables, and words, is automatic. That is, fast and unconscious. If we're good readers, then processing print has also become automatic. And that's what fluency is. Fluency is knowing a word and being able to say it and being able to read it consistently in a sentence without sounding choppy. This happens when whole words have been decoded and they're encountered often. So exposure to text, exposure to reading is what has to happen in order for students to be fluent readers. This is a good thing because it's an easy fix. It just means more practice. For most students, they haven't had enough practice to become fluent readers. I just want you to be aware of, it's called the Arkansas Rapid Naming Screener. And how you do it, how you try it, is you put it before students and they just read it from left to right. They say the color: red, green, blue, yellow, black, blue, as quickly as they can. And what this does, it tests their retrieval of information, because sometimes we're trying to figure out, when we test a student's reading, if they're a poor reader or if there's something else at work, like a cognitive delay. Is it really special education based? Is it a real deficiency cognitively where they're not making connections? Or is it just disfluency? They haven't had enough practice with reading. How do we determine that? This is one of the tests that's helpful, because if a student is struggling with just saying the basic color, that retrieval, pulling the information from their brain quickly and rapidly, automatically, smoothly, then if they're struggling with that, we know that is more of a cognitive issue, versus if they can just whip through these and say them really correctly and automated, but then when they struggle with text, basic, easy text, that's way below grade level, then we know that's most likely a reading issue. So that's an important determination. Sight words, you can also, these are also known as memory words. These are kind of your flashcard words. These are words like the, of, and, those high frequency words that make up 50% of text that you're never going to get away from. These have to be known and have a high level of automaticity with those. So these should be words that can't be sounded out, and words that students encounter frequently. And this starts even with letter recognition in the alphabet. So are we recognizing our letters and our sounds automatically? Then that leads to words and sentences and such. 97% of text is written in lowercase form. So whenever I'm working with kindergarten teachers, I always make sure that we are prioritizing writing lowercase text before uppercase text, because 97% of the text that you see is in lowercase. So our exception to kindergarten is writing their name. So capitals when they're writing their name. Otherwise, really focusing on our lowercase letters. One thing that I want to try with you, so please play along, because this is an excellent simulation, but it only works if you participate. If you need to grab something and pause this, grab something to write with and something to write on. And then I'm going to show you pencil grip. The correct pencil grip, we're just going to do this little activity. With your non-dominant hand, I'm right-handed, so I'm going to use my left hand. Take your non-dominant hand and then reach for your writing utensil, and you're going to grab it by the tip. So you're going to take your thumb and your first two fingers, you're going to grab it at the point, and then you're going to flip it so that it's resting between your thumb and your four fingers. 3 fingers grabbing the point and then flipping it between the thumb and the first 2 fingers. That's how you hold your pencil or pen. Now keep that grip, focus on that grip. You're going to write in cursive this sentence, and we're writing this sentence because it uses every letter in the English language. Take a minute. You've got your pencil grip in your non-dominant hand. Reach for that paper, and in your best cursive writing, write, "The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog." So let's go. The quick, like best handwriting, like this is going on a wedding invitation handwriting. Brown fox. Hope you're playing along, otherwise I feel silly. The quick brown fox jumps over the, this is rough, lazy, not even legible, dog. Okay, so that sucks. What's the point of this? The point is, where was all of your energy going when you wrote that sentence? You really had to concentrate. One, it took a lot longer than it should have. Your hand might be cramping. I wanted to give you this experience because so many of your students are struggling with this because they never developed handwriting fluency, whether it's keyboarding or handwriting fluency. If you are not fluent in your transcription of writing, transcription is the physical act of writing, composition is the mental act of writing. If you're not fluent in your physical transcription, your act of writing, are you going to write a lot or a little bit? A little bit. Are you going to be able to think about what you're writing as much as where your bandwidth, your mental bandwidth isn't there for the composition because you're so focused on how I form the letter? And all my mental energy and effort is going into the transcription piece and not the composition piece, into the physical act and not into the mental act. And that's where so many of our students are when they're writing for one reason or another. Keep that in mind. It might not be a laziness thing. It might not be a hate writing thing. It might be an actual physical fatigue that I'm just going to try to get out of this because it takes too much effort. It's too much work to write. So I'm going to write one sentence, even though I could tell you I know enough to make up 8 to 10 sentences. I'm going to write one sentence because that is a lot of work and effort. Physically, I don't have the fluency for it. Handwriting is critical, and probably many of you may have not learned it because I know I have 4 children. My 2 older boys never received handwriting instruction. It was always, there's an H, make your H look like mine. My boys write from the bottom up. All handwriting letters are supposed to be written from the top down. So top and then moving to the right. And then my younger 2 children, they had handwriting instruction and cursive and are fluent handwriters, and it makes a world of difference. We even had to practice my 17-year-old's signature the other day because when he is writing his signature, it takes 3 minutes. And he doesn't have that long of a name, but he is taking 3 minutes just to write his name in cursive, which really isn't a signature. We're physically writing and practicing what his signature looks like at 17. What happens when handwriting isn't taught? There's a clear connection between the development of handwriting, reading, writing, language, and critical thinking. Yet approximately 30% of elementary students struggle with basic handwriting, and this is because they don't get enough practice. Just like reading, they don't get enough practice. The impact of this, if students are not given the opportunity to master handwriting, they're going to have difficulty performing the following tasks: retrieving letters from memory, reproducing letters on paper, spelling accurately, extracting meaning from reading, which is comprehension, interpreting the context of words and phrases, basic decoding, and writing compositions. And I believe I've told you before when did we talk about the standards? So standards, the big myth with standards is we misunderstand them. We think that standards are a to-do list instead of these are an outcome of what we should know at the end of the year. We've taken handwriting and we've taken spelling out of the elementary curriculum. And so teachers think, oh, I don't have to teach it anymore. Or students don't need this. No, they still need it because these standards are an outcome of what students should be able to do. It's still your job to teach basic handwriting because it's part of brain development. I showed you the pictures of the brain and where the struggling reader is and where the strong reader is, and that strong reader has those multiple points. Handwriting is part of forming letters. It helps retrieval of letters from memory. Handwriting is part of the reading process. It's a linguistic process. We help solidify and form the reading process in our brain when we attach it to physical transcription and writing. And every district that I work in, I will tell my principals or my administrators that, listen, I get that we have to keyboard, that kids need to know how to keyboard because the test is coming, winter is coming, and they need to know how to be able to keyboard in order to test. We will never usurp the use of handwriting to teach keyboarding. One, it's not even developmentally appropriate for our primary students. They should not ever worry about a keyboard or keyboarding. We don't really intro into keyboarding until middle school. Never use your time that you have in your daily schedule for keyboarding. For little guys, it should be focused on handwriting. There's a great book called Making It Stick, and it's not even an education text. It's just more of like a learning in general text. It applies a lot of different fields, but the accelerated or quick learner only needs 1 to 2 practices with things in order to become independent and proficient. The on-pace or typical learner is a larger range. Someone needs either anywhere from 4 to 14 practices to become independent and proficient. That striving reader, struggling learner needs more than 20 practices. We have so many students that are sitting in a special education classroom or with that label, not because they have any cognitive delays or deficiencies, because they did not get enough practice when they needed it. There wasn't enough space in the curriculum or the pacing guide, so we just pushed them forward before they were ready. It's this really difficult dance of how do I know when to push and keep going because maybe they'll never get it versus they just need more time to practice. Here's just a visual when I mentioned earlier space practice versus mass practice. Mass practice is that cramming versus space practice. We get retention, it sticks long term when we have space practice, when we, once a week or every other day, for an entire year, for an entire semester, we are getting practice of the things that we need. So you need to identify the standards in the grade level that students must master. Before your grade level, after your grade level, look at that full scope. What are the skills they must master? So if you're a secondary ELA student or now teacher, you need to make sure that we're prioritizing reading, writing, and thinking. I need lots and lots of time for students to read out loud, to practice basic writing skills, just really firm. I know how to make a sentence. I know how to make a paragraph. I know how to put all those together. So those things and thinking. How do I think critically about stuff? And we create space for that. During our day, every day, those things should be happening. I'm not sure if you remember, there was something called DEAR, acronym, Drop Everything and Read. So the goal was in elementary school or even in middle school, we would have a DEAR day or a DEAR morning. It was like Wednesday mornings. We'd drop everything for 20 minutes and we'd have students read silently. And that was based on this research. It came out in the 80s, and this was very popular practice then. The research tells us if a student reads 20 minutes a day, and let me define reading because it's real reading, not fake reading. Real reading is I have my eyes on a text, I'm reading independently, I'm paying attention, and I'm understanding what I'm reading. Okay, that kind of reading. If a student is reading 20 minutes a day, then they will be exposed to 1.8 million words a year, and they're likely to score in the 90th percentile on standardized tests. And then you can see for 5 minutes, they're in the 50th percentile. 1 minute, they're in the 10th percentile. This is throughout a whole school day. So if you think 7 periods, that should be pretty easy. We can get 3 minutes of real reading in class a day. That should not be a problem. The problem is, however, that students aren't really reading. One, if they are a behind grade level reader. If I'm in 7th grade and I'm reading at a 3rd grade level, I don't have access to a book in my classroom that maybe is an independent reading level for me. I'm going to probably fake read, or I'm bored, I don't like reading, so I'm going to stare at the window and I'm just going to kill 20 minutes. There was so much loss of instructional time during this because kids weren't actually reading, they were fake reading. You might have a few that are actually participating, and those are probably the kids that already are good readers. So the goal is 20 minutes of reading a day. How do we get into that 20 minutes of reading a day? Let's look at automaticity, prosody equals fluency. Automaticity, I see a word and I know it automatically. Prosody, my voice sounds natural like reading. And then fluency is the equation of the outcome of putting both of those together. And I can practice those each individually. I can practice flashcards and, my automaticity. I can practice prosody. Those are great through poetry readings or through dramatic readings, reading plays together. I want to show you a quick fluency strategy. We're going to practice a few. Building fluency. So this is scooping. When I'm reading like a robot, I'm reading choppy. We know that. Set an example. I want to read smoothly. And so the scoop is I put my finger under the first word, under we, and then it's a physical scoop, so kind of like kinesthetic learning. And I'm explaining to students that my eyes actually read faster than my mouth. So I'm trying to practice and get my mouth to keep up with my eyes because I can see 4 or 5 words at a time quickly. So I'm trying to keep my mouth up with that. And I would say, we know that. So I make a little scoop on the page with my finger. So it's good to do on hard, with an actual physical page or text. So we know that. And then I pick up my finger and I put it under set. Set an example. Pick up my finger, put it under would. Would you please? And I practice these over and over again. And you can see, here's we know that. Here's we know that. Would you please? Would you please? So it's repeated, and these are age appropriate or age respectful for secondary students, or you can use it with any text. You can have them go in and you can have them circle the subject nouns or the connectives, and that then becomes the scoop. And so that's called scooping, and that's something you can do in a center or with a whole class. I want to show you a few of the high impact strategies, meaning these are some of the best strategies. There's 1,000 strategies in the world. I want to show you the best ones. These are ones that I would encourage you to do on a daily basis for choral reading and a weekly basis for the others. Choral reading means we're all reading out loud simultaneously. And if for high school kids that may be unfamiliar, but you set the norm. You explain why we do this. Let me go through the process for you. So let me give you an example. Okay, so here's an article we're going to read together. Teachers say older kids need help with basic reading skills too. That's fitting. Okay, so I'm going to just start with this paragraph. And if you're my class, which you are, I'm going to start with this first paragraph up here, the nationally. I read first. I display the text. They might have the text in front of them, or they can just look at the board as long as it's large and everybody can see it and follow along. I'm going to model it first. I'm going to keep kind of karaoke ball here. I'm going to keep my finger on the word if it's displayed, before me, or if I have a dot cam, I can keep my finger under the word like that. I do first. Remember, I do, we do, you do. I do first. And here's our title. The nationally representative, I'm going to stop right there. Representative. Representative is a multisyllabic word. Those can be tricky to spell. So let me say it. Let's say it together. Representative. 5 syllables. Let's do it together, everyone. Representative. Great, thanks. The Nationally Representative Survey from the RAND, that's an acronym, not a word. So when you see all of the words capitalized, that means that is an acronym. So each letter stands for a different name in that corporation. In this case, we'd say RAND or RAND Corporation. RAND Corporation includes, numbers are tricky, and students actually really struggle with reading numbers aloud. 83. Let's all say that together. 83. Thanks. In grades 3 through 8. On average, teachers in these grades reported that 44% of their students always or nearly always face challenges reading the content in their classes. 97%, let's take a look at this. Why do you think it's words here? In the sentence before, it was numerals. Have you seen that? You notice that difference there. The difference here is we use 97 in words because it's starting out a sentence, and one of the rules is that we can't use numbers when we start a sentence. That's why there's that difference there. It's not an inconsistency. We can say the numers when we're talking about percents, except if it's at the beginning of a sentence. 97% of teachers said they modified their instruction to support struggling readers at least once or twice a week. Modified means kind of changed or adapted. All right, so let's now read this together. Everyone, make your pace match mine. Here we go. The Nationally Representative Survey from RAND. I'm going to stop there. What did I do? I modeled first, and I pulled out any words that might trip them up, that might be unfamiliar. They really struggle reading numbers. Let's say that out loud together. Any words that they might not understand, I'm going to go ahead and pull out their meanings. Anything else that might trip them up, I go ahead and pre-teach during my model survey or during my model reading. Then we come back and we read it together. So we're all reading chorally. The goal is to get everyone close to that 20 minutes a day. And by reading chorally, even in short snippets, we're helping to up that ante. Now, the second paragraph, or maybe I'll read the next 3 paragraphs because they're short. I'll read those out loud. And then maybe we read chorally as a class still. Or I can say lean over with your elbow partner and continue to read chorally with your elbow partner the rest of that page. We're not going to read an entire text this way. It's a great way to introduce a new topic, a new unit, review vocabulary together. It's a fabulous, fabulous strategy, highly effective. If you don't do choral reading for anything else, which you should, read it for instructions, directions, every assignment. Read instructions chorally together. It makes a difference. And then they're not like, wait, what are we supposed to do? Because you all just read it together. That's a look at choral reading, and it's a great strategy, and it is still appropriate for adults and big kids. And if you're a struggling reader, you do not want kids to read out loud or call on them. Round robin reading, where you start at one row and you go up and down the rows, or you popcorn, which is you read, you read, you read, that actually has a negative reading impact. Research shows that, because if I'm shy or I'm a bad, struggling reader, I don't have confidence in that, you're putting me on the spot like that. That is a terrible feeling. And I'm going to try to go to the bathroom. I always heard I'd rather be a badass than a dumbass. So if I need to act up to get out of class just to not look stupid, then I'm going to do that. I'm about to be problematic in here. If we're choral reading, though, our voices are together. Everyone can participate without the spotlight being shown on them. And that's what we want. We want 100% participation, and we want everybody to feel good about it and no one to, have to talk about this later in therapy. The next strategy is called echo reading. It's very similar, but I'm partner reading, and it takes twice as long because I have an echo. I'm partner A and you're partner B. I read paragraph A, then it's your turn. You read paragraph A. Then I read paragraph B, and it's your turn. You read paragraph B. We each get a turn to read every paragraph. Lots of questions about this. Do we put a higher reader with a lower reader so they can model? Actually, research says no. We should put like abilities together when we're doing partner reading. Kind of less intimidating that way. It might be like the blind leading the blind. If you have non-readers or readers that are reading at like a second grade level, and you're reading a higher text, like a 10th grade text, then that's maybe where you do centers, or you pull a small group of students, or you support those students that are the lowest readers while the other students partner read. There's different ways to do that. But echo reading is I read, then you read. If we were together physically, we would practice this, because what you find is that when you're reading, you're focused on the performance. You're trying not to sound like an idiot. You're just trying to make sure that you're saying all the right words and that you're, sound okay. And then when your partner's reading, you relax and you can actually pay attention to the content. Also, we know multiple readings increase comprehension. That just makes sense, right? The more we read something, the more we understand it. And that's what echo reading is all about. Read and review, also one of my favorites. Great for fiction and nonfiction text. All of these are. We're partners. I'm going to read paragraph A. And as I'm reading, I'm thinking of a question that I can pull out of that first paragraph. I read the paragraph, and then I find a question, and then I ask you the question. You're my partner. I'm going to ask you a question. You're anticipating that. So you're following along and paying attention because you're trying to answer whatever I ask you. I read, I ask you a question. You might have to reskim the paragraph in order to answer the question. Multiple readings, we're both paying attention more because we have a purpose for reading. And then we go back and forth. That was the first paragraph. Now you read paragraph 2 and ask me a question about what you read. I answer it. This is a slower process, but we're thinking more deeply about every paragraph and we're having discussions about it. Teachers that have used this strategy see their just weekly quizzes go up by like 60% because they're actually doing the reading and they're reading deeply with a purpose. This is a great strategy, and we don't worry about what kind of questions they're asking, what level of questions they're asking. It is hard for students to even ask a basic question for them to be able to form that. We don't want to write it down because then we just learned that writing can be really difficult for some students. If we've added in writing, we've added this whole other layer of complexity. We want their mental energy going on the text and understanding it, not on writing. It kind of diffuses where the mental energy is going. Okay, so just be very intentional about where we want their mental efforts going. Dramatic reading helps with that prosody. reading where it sounds natural, like speaking, poetry, plays, or you can take any text, even a nonfiction text now. Take a passage, pop it into ChatGPT or your AI platform. Say, write a dramatic play for 4 students using this piece of text. Boom, it'll pop it out. You can even say like what lexile, like what level, 10th grade text. Here's the original source. Make this into a play for 3 students. And then you print that out or you put it on your Canvas, your LMS, and then they read from there. They're all, again, everyone has a part. I'm not just 3 students are reading and the rest of the class is listening to them. No, we do small groups of 4 or 3 or how many ever parts. So everyone's participating and then they're getting that information and they're all practicing reading out loud. I love the company Saddleback. They have decodable readers for teens, even the classics. They're about $12 a book. You get a little bit money at the beginning of the year in your classroom to spend on classroom supplies. This is something you could build up over time, but it goes all the way down to even 1st and 2nd grade. I don't know. And as we wrap up, I don't know if I've shared this before. This QR code is just a link to my information. It's like a digital business card. So it has all my email addresses, cell phone, social media stuff, website. So you can get on there if you want to contact me other than via Canvas. And then my friend and business partner and I have a podcast we've had for a few years now. It's called The Science of Reading for grades 4 through 12. If this is something that you're interested in, we can do that. You feel free to get on Spotify and check it out. Let me know if you have any questions. And when you're finished with this, watch that Anita Archer video on explicit instruction, and then walk through the rest of the assignments or modules. I hope this was helpful. Keep all of that in mind. We're being specific in our explanations. I do, we do, you do. And then fluency is a must. It's in reading, and we also have fluency in writing. And that matters when we try to go to the active composition. So stay tuned. See you next week.